This is the last time I'll talk about that son of a bitch movie. This is a great way for me to finish off talking about Hellraiser. I mean, I'm doing it in the company of an awful lot of other people who have been involved in the making of those movies. And I've exhausted my observations. Probably exhausted them 5 years ago. I think in a way the movies belong to different people now. Maybe arguably they still belong to Doug, who has been the constant through all these movies. And he is, after all, the icon at the heart of the Hellraiser movies. And they belong to the fans. And I think that's very important too. They belong to people who love those movies perhaps more than I do. The first movies you make, and this is a story you hear so often, so I think there's a commonality to it, are basically luck. And I had a friend who had a brother who had a friend. The friend was Oliver Parker, the brother was a guy called Alan Parker, and his friend was a fellow called Chris Figg. Chris Figg wanted to produce movies, and I wanted to direct a movie, and we were both, you know, without any experience really in our fields. But two inexperienced people is always more interesting as a combination than one inexperienced person, and we kind of gave each other some courage, I think. Alan Parker, who's not the filmmaker Alan Parker, but a very first-rate guy, gave us some seed money to put together a package that contained a lot of drawings that I had done of the Cenobites, so that I could help anybody who wanted to invest in the movie have a sort of a vision of what we were trying to make. And it wasn't a very sophisticated package. It was the script, it was maybe half a dozen drawings and a couple of log lines, just trying to give people a sense of, well, this is what it could be. And we then, this is where the luck came in. Chris and I flew out here, and the first people we went to, New World rather, said, you know what, we'll do this.
When I first met Clive, I had gotten a phone call. I was at home, and Clive and Chris Figg had gone to Chicago, and they had gone to New York, and they had gone to Los Angeles trying to cast Kirsty. So I went down to the office immediately. I didn't know what the script was about. I didn't know anything. And I met him, and he was really enthusiastic, and he was really communicative, and he just said to me, okay, your Uncle Frank is in your father's skin, and he wants to kill you and have sex with you. And tell me how you feel about that. And then he gave me the sides, and it just, I felt it when I was there. There was just like a really nice kind of understanding and openness and like a creative kind of cohesion.
If I'm remembering this right, I believe I had a choice of playing one of the removal men who delivered the mattress to the house on Ludovico Street when Larry snags his finger and drips the blood that brings Frank back to life. Or this odd guy with no name under latex with a bunch of nails in his head. And I hummed and hawed about it. This was my first movie. And it seemed to me perfectly logical and reasonable that if I was going to be appearing on screen for the first time, it would be a good idea if people could see me and they would be able to recognize me. These are solidly good actorly decisions to make. And without hesitation, I would say if I had been being offered one of the male leads in the film, which I was not, but if I'd been being offered Frank or Larry as opposed to Pinhead, or as opposed to this lead Cenobite, I would have taken the lead without a moment's hesitation, and I would have been dead wrong.
I think when people came out of Hellraiser for that first time, they saw it, they probably said, hey, check out the guy with the pins in his head. I mean, that's what they were saying. I didn't really have a sense that that was what was going to happen. I would love to say that, oh yeah, of course, it was all planned. It wasn't. But I did know that we were going into taboo areas, we were going into forbidden areas, which classically is what good horror movies do.
Historically, you had Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, and then later on, you know, Freddy and Jason and Michael Myers, and along comes Pinhead. And it seems to me that, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what everyone connected to ultimately, is this new unusual thing that obviously touched a chord, you know, fulfilled a void, I guess.
In my end of the industry, people are always coming to me and they're saying, you know, we want something that's really scary, we want it really disturbing, but we want it beautiful. And that's a very, very difficult thing to accomplish. And Clive accomplished it absolutely with perfection with Pinhead. That's an image that I think this entire generation will never forget, and generations to come.
One of the things that makes Pinhead so much more interesting, in my opinion, than Freddy or Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees is that you feel he is a man of the world. He's seen it all and he's bored with it all. And I think that's kind of interesting.
95% of what Pinhead is what Doug Bradley brings to the role. But I was very surprised what he, you know, how different his performance was. It was very general-like. It was very someone who stood back and had control, and that brought a great strength to the character and a great appeal of that strength. And Doug's voice was just fantastic. When you hear him, and he has those wonderful lines, the whole thing just grew and grew. So I think the look is one thing, but if the wrong actor had been wearing this, Pinhead would never be the success that it is.
We have such sights to show you.
As far as I recall, I think he was away for 4 or 5 weeks, and we had one meeting where he gave me some very clear indications of what he would like, and then I stayed here and did my research. He gave me the PFIQ magazines and I produced the drawings. My notes say that he wanted 1, areas of revealed flesh where some kind of torture has or is occurring, 2, something associated with butchery involved, and then here we have a very Clive turn of phrase. I've written down repulsive glamour. And the other notes that I made about what he wanted was that they should be magnificent super butchers. There would be 1 or 2 of them with some hangers-on, as he put it, and there would be 4 or 5 altogether.
We would start in, roll in there about 4:30 or 5 in the morning. Meet Bob and the guys from the image animation, who'd then slap on a bit of black makeup around my mouth and put on the skull cap, force that onto the head. Then usually they go off and work on probably Dougie or Grace, because their makeups were far more complicated than Nick's and mine. And then finally they get to the bit I dread, the the mask was skin tight because it was made for my face inside of it. And it usually took about 2 or 3 people to pull it down over the top of my head. And it used to take a minute or 2 for it to actually get into place. But within that minute there'd be a section where your nose was covered and your mouth was covered and you just knew you couldn't breathe. And that was a bit scary. Finally it would get into place and there you'd sit in complete isolation for 12, 14 hours a day.
Filming is a lot about waiting around for things to happen, and then you just do a little bit and then you're back in the dressing room again. So we got on very well, and the whole makeup for all the Cenobites was done in this one, 2 rooms. And it was a good laugh. As I say, I got into lots of trouble with the sound man because my laugh tends to carry large distances.
Nick who plays Chatterer, we've been at drama school for 3 years together before we were working on this, and we come into the makeup in the mornings, I don't know, 4 or 5 in the morning, and I'm not a morning person, and none of the other actors were particularly either, so there was a really nice calm atmosphere in the morning. Everybody was very quiet, and the poor old makeup team had been up like hours before us, so they were very quiet, and there was usually nice classical music playing in the background. But Nick has got so much energy, and he bound in at 4 in the morning going, "Good morning everybody," and used to drive us all crazy because he was just so loud and so energetic, and you just wanted to hit him and say, "Shut up." It's 4 in the morning.
They're fucked up now and they were fucked up then.
Well, Bertha Frank, we'd already done it once. The first time we did it, it was a dried up corpse that came out of the walls, and none of us were very happy with this, and it was decided right at the end that we would go back and redo it and become this sort of visceral nightmare imagery. So it starts off with the floorboards themselves. So what we had is a rig to move the floorboards and little rigs to lift up and vibrate and lift up the nails, and as they dropped out, and then we had this wonderful super slime goo that we were pumping through, and it's not the easiest stuff in the world to pump because it's like pumping the thickest porridge you've ever seen, and that oozes up through the floors. Before that, the blood has already been sucked down and the goblets have been sucked up. Every single time, each of these were different rigs. There was a rig to make the floor shake, there was a rig to pump up through the floor, there was a rig to make the blood, which was shot in reverse, and then there's that wonderful, beautiful moment. And it's, I think, a lot down to how Robin lit this. It's beautifully backlit, and the 2 arms just shoot up, and then they have that moment where they hold there, and they flop down to the sides. Then there's a lot of reverse photography going on. What we actually did was destroy the rib cage, and we pulled strings out through wax while we had burners on them. So this whole stuff would then be shot backwards. And instead of it being destroyed, you'd see it starting to grow and blossom like flowers. And then you get the head appearing at the end, and it was all really stacked up that we wanted, each time we cut, we wanted to have another stage and show another technique and another texture to it. It's certainly the most visceral effect I've ever done.
It goes like this. Prosthetics was the question. Do you object to being buried alive in a sea of rubber, which is what I was, because they had to do a head cast of me, all right? And that was a freaky thing. I couldn't take all that. It was sort of straws up the nostrils and trying to breathe through this plaster cast. So I'm afraid I blew that. It didn't matter. The main body costume was prefabricated around my form, and I got into that as a sort of bodysuit for each morning's work. But the head, as a result of not being able to make a complete pull-on fit, had to be done, in sections, bit by bit by bit, each morning. And this was the bit. 6 hours 6 hours in makeup. unit car used to pick me up at 4 in the morning into production village Cricklewood, and Bob Keane and Cliff Wallace, Cliff was my sort of personal creator, whacked on these several bits of latex rubber in very thin film, cheeks, head, different sections for different parts of the head, which was a long, grueling process. Glue, gunge, and 6 hours whittled down after we'd got up and running. We got it down to about 4 in the end.
There's a description in the Hellbound Heart of what the Cenobites look like, and it indicates that they're sort of what we would now call modern primitives. I mean, there's a whole movement, isn't there now, of people who've made an art form of their own bodies, piercing, scarification, brandings of various kinds. Back then it was much, much harder to see that. There was much less of that around.
Hellraiser is like a breeding ground for our imaginations for our next performance. You know, you watch one of those and you're like, oh my God, I'd love to do that. You know, we can do that. You know, you see it in the movies, and they're pulling the flesh, and the flesh is coming out, and there's hooks in it, and it's all these great visual images that are just terrifying. But it's something that we can do, and we're like, oh, cool, let's do that next weekend. You know,
Clive's imagination has helped us build a reality. We've taken what he's imagined and gotten so drawn to it that it's become a reality. Imaginations like that help us find new ways to push ourselves.
To do what we do.
Certainly Hellraiser holds its place among the best, the most interesting, the most original, the most ideas-driven horror movies of the last 30 years.
I don't think we knew, or I think we thought it was going to be a good film. We thought it was going to be an original film, but to think it was going to be as big now, I think you couldn't possibly. It was a tiny budget movie. I think we thought it was going to be a stepping stone to bigger projects. But it really caught the imagination of the audience, and it just disturbed them enough and touched on things which films had stayed away from. And it did feel a little bit like that when you're making it. There was always something a bit special, always feeling like you just don't really want to go here, but you want to put your fingers in.
I think we all look back on films that have truly disturbed us and terrified us, and you realize there are only a few every decade, you know. You start with Psycho, and then some people would say Rosemary's Baby in the 60s, and some others, you know, and you've got The Exorcist in the 70s. In the 80s, it seems to me there's the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and there's Clive's movie, you know, as the two films that were just absolutely extraordinarily disturbing and scary, you know. And as far as I can tell, its reputation seems to grow year by year, and I'm happy to see that.
Everybody really just went there. Everybody. And you don't get that a lot. You don't get that kind of commitment across the boards. And it works. People, I think, like the intimacy and the danger and the rawness and the ugliness that it's so grotesque that I think it's really beautiful, if that makes sense. It's so human and so flawed that it, I think, makes it more easily to relate to, because it's damaged and it's wounded and it's open.
You know, although I was in it, I'm not particularly a horror movie freak in terms of whatever the genre, going back to whenever. I've never been a sort of, I just happen to find myself in this thing. The end product, I mean, short of sort of talking, I don't know what the budgets were or whatever. All I know is that whatever they were and in the time we had, we got it in. And the end result was what it was. We ended up with a cult horror movie classic.
We want the man who did this.
I think you could say something about the Clive Barker who wrote all those things and, yes, made those movies. Who is very different from the Clive Barker who's sitting here now. I mean, I think I was much more interested in shocking people. I was much more interested in breaking some boundaries down about what horror fiction could do. I think I was to some degree successful in that, and it's one of the reasons why I'm not interested in doing it anymore. I think that there's a very real chance I won't direct any more movies, and I will produce and continue to produce and write screenplays, but I don't know how many more movies I have in me as director. It was something of a grandiose hobby for me, and right from the beginning. I mean, I slipped into it by good fortune and rather quietly, and probably will slip out the same way.
If you're lying, it said, if you're trying to squirm your way out of this, deliver him alive to us then. Make him confess himself. And maybe we won't
tear your soul apart.
Oh, I know where Pinhead goes for me because I have the story halfway finished, and it will appear in print. And all I will say is that he will be very quiet when I've finished.
Jesus wept.
To be able to go into your dark side and to like summon it up, you know, and not to indicate it, because so many actors when they play villains, they put on that mask of evil, but they want to, sort of like peek around the mask and wink, it's okay, I'm not really a bad guy, I'm really a nice guy. And it's such bullshit. You can see them winking, from behind the mask to convince people that they're not a bad person, as if really immersing yourself into villainy makes you a bad person. You're an actor, for Christ's sakes. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. We play the dark and the light and the grays of it. What I look for in a character is the mystery. Because every really good character has a secret. And for me, the most interesting characters have the biggest secrets. And they're secrets that will never be revealed. And that makes them attractive. An audience is just naturally just drawn towards them. So rather than sitting back in their seats, and being able to anticipate what this person is going to do, and they're brought towards that character because they don't know what that character is going to do. They don't know really what that character is thinking. In terms of a role, I always look if there is a chance to play subtext or to create a subtext, an undergirding, a sort of like subterranean world for the character, because that's the most interesting kind of character to play. Oh, it's my first film, yeah. I mean, I was an actor before then. I mean, I was very much an actor. I mean, I'd done a lot of theater. And Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood came to see me in this off-Broadway play and hired me for Dirty Harry. I had no clue that Dirty Harry would be not only as popular, but as influential as it was. And to have the impact that it did was the farthest thing from my mind, when I was doing it. All I knew when I was doing Dirty Harry, I was having a ball. I was able to let the beast out and just go for it. And Don Siegel was by far, I mean by far, the best fucking director I have ever worked with. This man was an American genius. And it was a collaboration, and the kind of collaboration that I thought, naively, being my first film, that I would have every time I did a film. It's an odd thing. I mean, Dirty Harry gave me a film career and at the same time took it away. So in terms of film, that was it. When I did get typecast, and when I couldn't get arrested, really, other than playing the same kind of role, I was shocked. And I was also, like, really hurt, because I did not want to spend the rest of my life doing the same character. Or I did not want to become the Bela Lugosi of my generation. But fortunately, I was a theater actor, and I had theater to fall back on. And it wasn't falling back on it, I just went back to doing theater. My agent at the time called me up and said that there's this horror movie. Do you want to go up for it? And there are a couple of Englishmen who are in town, and they want to see you. And I thought, well, if they want to see me, because they called for me specifically, I thought, well, that's fine, I'll go. And I went, and Clive and Chris Feig, were the two Englishmen who were in town, and I had a lovely meeting. And it's funny when you audition for, at least I don't know what it is now, but in those days when you audition for an English project, whether it be film or television, it's very different. I mean, basically, it really was an interview. And there are interviews I've had, on English projects where you'd have a glass of wine and you just sit and you just shoot the shit, and it's very pleasant. And it was very pleasant with those guys. And it turns out that Clive really did. I mean, I guess based on Dirty Harry or whatever, really did want me for the film. Clive was, being his first film, I mean, he was very open, and that was the joy about working with him. It was a collaboration, and right from the beginning, and Clive very much wanted to root the horror into a domestic, relatable experience, an unhappy marriage. And the horrors that come out of an unhappy marriage, extended, obviously, and at that time, I think Clive was at his most creative. He was, the Books of Blood, which were an incredible collection of stories, a great imagination. And he was taking that work and that I think that the energy of his creative life at that point into filmmaking.
Success. Voila. Well, this is it. The old homestead.
The fact that Hellraiser was going to be shot in England was for me one of the attractions, having gone to drama school in England and having a lot of friends there. The house in Hellraiser in North London was the ugliest house. It was creepy. It was just as creepy as what it looks like in the film. And it was our only set, and it became claustrophobic. And it got to the point where there were times when I would come to that house and I really didn't want to go there. I was hoping, why can't we go and do an exterior in Hyde Park or something?
Kirsty!
Hi.
Hello, sweetie. Come here.
Ashley was a baby. She was my little daughter, and she really was. I mean, in every sense of the word, I felt paternal towards her. But she's an open person and a dear heart. Claire Higgins is a dynamo. She is like an incredible actor. I mean, she has won all kinds of awards, doing all kinds of really heavyweight roles on stage. And she was perfect for this role. But she is, she's a dynamo. She has incredible strength and breadth as an actor, and a real passion, just a natural, Irish passion for what she does. I adored working with her. When I was hired to play Larry Cotton, I told a friend of mine that finally I get a chance to play Fred McMurray. Really, he's sort of like this nice guy, straight ahead, and it's a role that I've never gotten a chance to play in film. But for the kicker, the icing on the cake was then I could play the other guy, Once I put, once obviously Larry is skinned alive by his brother Frank, and puts on the skin, then I get to do Frank. That it was fabulous to be able to do the sort of like the dark and the light of the side of basically of the same character, because they were really, the two of them add up to the darkness and the lightness of one man.
He was insane, baby. A mad dog. I had to put him out of his misery. Jesus, what a scene.
Well, with a first-time director, it depends. It depends on really on how talented they are, whether it can be an exciting experience or yeah, I mean, because if the person has no ideas, if it's and they're just plodding along with a lack of experience and not able to sort of simply move the camera from one place to another, if they don't have an idea or a vision, then that can be dreary. But if somebody's filled with ideas, which of course Clive is, all they have to do is say, look, I have this idea, and it's your job as the actor to execute. And if the ideas are good, as Clive's were, then it's easy to have an image, because how to execute it, because that's what you're trained to do. You're trained to use your imagination so that you can take an idea and put it into action.
Come to Daddy.
And Clive's enthusiasm was such a tonic. It was so refreshing, and it was a stimulus too. So, so you want to work for a Clive or a Don Siegel, and you want to come up with ideas that excite them. Once I came down the stairs, putting on the, doing the final adjustments on the skin, I knew what to do with that guy. I knew it, that guy. And one of my favorite scenes is like when he's in front of the mirror and he's sort of doing that, and she comes in, she says, "How awful?" I says, "Yes, it's awful. It's awful. It's terrible." I mean, it's one of the favorite scenes I've ever done in my life. I loved it. Prior to Hellraiser, I had done almost no prosthetic work. So the prosthetics that we had to do for the film that was my first, and that final shot where where he's torn apart. I mean, setting up that shot, getting into the makeup, all of that was excruciating. It took forever. I mean, it took us maybe more than one day to do just that one sequence of pulling him apart. But it was extraordinary. And Bob Keane and those guys, I mean, they really knew what they were doing. And I was so impressed. And even while I was suffering through this bullshit and the prosthetics, I knew it was going to look great. Originally, Clive had written "Fuck You," which was a very defiant, thing to do, and that's what he wanted, I mean, at that point. But while the defiance is right, I just felt that the line itself was kind of banal for such a fabulous sequence. And my imagination is I guess going to church school and stuff like that. I decided. But Jesus Wept is also one of my favorite expressions, and I thought that was, I suggested it, and Clive enthusiastically accepted the idea. I'll be honest why I wasn't in the sequel. When I read the script, I thought the script was not good, to say the least. And after the level I thought of quality that the first script maintained, I thought that this was really dipping below that. But I said, okay, I'll do it, because I'm an actor and I need to make a living, so I'll do it. So, but just pay me what you paid me in the first one. And they didn't want to. They wanted to pay me less. I guess it was part of budget cutting for the producing company, New World. Which I thought was ridiculous. especially since, you know, at that time, you know, I was not working under a Screen Actors Guild contract, so I didn't get, you know, the Screen Actors Guild protection, you know, the health pension and residuals. But the fact that they didn't even want to pay me what they paid me in the first one, I thought, well, I'm passing, and you know, and that was that. It really, truly was an original vision. I mean, I had never seen anything like Hellraiser before I saw that. I did not realize how deeply weird and bent the vision was.
We can all be happy here.
I think Hellraiser has endured because, as I say, it was rooted. It was rooted in probably one of our most relatable domestic situations, a marriage. And the desires that come out of a woman who is so totally sexually unsatisfied, but unsatisfied on every level. And a man who is like so blind, who's trying to do the right thing, but yet everything he does just makes it worse. So all the horror comes out of that. And that's why I think, you know, basically people, you know, there was a way in for all of us to relate to it, so we could get into it.
Bastard!
Hush now.
If I were to sum up my feelings about Hellraiser, and I mean 20 years later, it was a great job. It was one of a handful of film roles that I've had that have meant something to me. Essentially, that's, as an actor, that's all I can say, because it's another stop along the way in terms of my career. But this one, it was a major stop and a memorable stop.
So, Ashley, did you literally have to go to hell to make this movie?
To go to hell to make Hellraiser? Well, kinda. Because, like, I couldn't wear a lot of makeup, and I couldn't look real pretty. So that was really hard, to not look real pretty, and I had to say things. So, like, I had to say, like, a lot of words and act, like, really upset. So I used to, like, splash water on my eyes and, like, listen to a tape recording of ducks being killed. Because I really like ducks. I was in a teenage drama workshop, and another girl who was in the workshop was PA, I think, over at New World at the time. And Clive and Chris Figg was the producer, and they hadn't found the role of Kirsty yet, and hadn't found the actress for the role of Kirsty yet. And they had been to Chicago and I think London and New York, and they had come to LA, and this girl said, well, I know who you should see. And they ended up calling me at home and said, get over there. I had no idea what, and so I go and I meet with Clive, and he says, you know, your uncle is in your father's skin, and he's trying to kill you and have sex with you, in that order. Go. And so I cold read, and they asked if I would go to England to screen test, where I tested with Doug, and Doug played both Pinhead and Andy's role in the scene at the Chinese restaurant. So he was Dad and Demon, and I was just out of my mind because I had never been to Europe. So to look at everything, and plus there was so much jet lag and plane flight and culture shock and excitement of auditioning for something. I had no idea what I was stepping on board to do.
Wait! Please wait!
No time for argument.
I remember when I read the script. I mean, Clive's so talented with his language anyway, but it was lyrical, and it was exciting, and every character spoke with a different cadence, and every character had a different journey. It was so visual, because he paints as well, so he painted with his words, and it all just made sense to me. Like, I never thought, oh, I hope I get this, or I just felt it and went right in. I only think that people can be courageous if they're afraid. And I think in Hellraiser, each character found out what they were made of. Every person reveals who they are by the end of the movie. And I don't believe that Kirsty knew how strong she was. Working on it, I think because I had no expectation. I had nothing to base that experience on. I was so open to whatever came about. It was just transcendent. It was kind of like a coming of age for me. And Clive would give as much as anyone else. So, and by the end, we were just knocked out. Just the scene where I'm being chased took 3 weeks, and it was 3 weeks of 15-hour days, and that mindset was very, very exhausting. But Clive would come to the set looking at least as exhausted as I was. He was in the trenches with us. We were all there to do our very best. Everyone gave more than we needed to. Right when I signed the contract for the first movie, they must have had an inkling that it was something special, because I signed to do the first two. I was contractually bound to do the second one. Maybe that's why it's called Hellbound. It wasn't as emotionally satisfying. It wasn't, there's a courage to Kirsty. There's a stand and fight aspect to her personality that I don't think worked in the second one. I have a tendency to prefer the more visceral, more intimate expressions of art, painting and music and film, certainly. I prefer that. So as an artist, I enjoy doing the first one much more.
Take it easy. Now listen, they're gone. Whatever you saw, they're gone.
Well, it kept diluting. Like, the first one, I really felt like Kirsty made sense. And I don't believe that Kirsty would have ever deferred to anybody. So the second one, I was creatively a little, again, bound. So creatively, I didn't feel like I got to express who I believe Kirsty to be. And by the third one, because it was flashback and enough time had passed, they put me in a wig, they patted my clothes, and to get me into kind of that frantic state, I'm not a smoker. They wanted me to smoke in the scene. I ended up smoking 2 solid packs of cigarettes. So I think I just had nicotine poisoning, and that's what kind of, you know, helped the performance along at that point. Doug called me at home and said, hey, do you want to do a cameo in Hellraiser 90 or whatever one they're on now? And I talked to the director over the phone, who was a DP and was really lovely and articulate, and I went to Canada, and I remember reading the script, and Kirsty is inherently good. She has integrity and a really pure soul, and the kind of disassociative, nasty quality. We're sitting there and we're kicking back sake and eating sushi and going, how the hell are we going to do this? And they decided to make it a dream sequence, because otherwise she just would never turn like that. She just wouldn't do it. She wouldn't kill innocent people no matter how immoral they were. She just wouldn't do that. She only fights back. She doesn't seek out and hurt people. You know, I didn't see the downside of being in Hellraiser. What I think was that I was young and I didn't recognize that there's a business to it. And so I got put in a lot of movies where I'm tied to altars by goat creatures that look like supermodels, and I'm bludgeoning creatures with femur bones, and I'm talking puppets. And I remember thinking, you know, I want to do film, I want to do art, and then, you know, I'm in some, you know, Eastern European country talking a puppet. I mean, like, this wasn't quite what I imagined. So it took a while to equalize out, you know. I got to travel a lot, a lot, and there was a great deal of art outside those films. They weren't necessarily in the films themselves, but the life experiences that I gleaned from those, immense. I've done art my whole life. I don't see it as dark. I paint the light, I don't paint dark. When I go to draw something or to render something, I always start with highlights. That's what I see. So when people say that, I've kept my art really private for a long time because of that, because people would look at it and be like, whoa. I think Freud would have a field day, but I have no idea what any of it means. They're actually very similar, painting and acting, for me. It's directly proportionate to how selfless I am in the moment that I'm working. And in that I mean, if I'm critiquing or judging or tight in some way, it's just not going to work. And the more generous I can be and the more open to whatever shows up I can be, the better I find my work is. And I paint better when I act, and I act better when I paint.
The box. You opened it. We came.
It's just a puzzle box!
Being in Hellraiser was a blessing because I got to work with so many talented people and so broad in their ability to create in a collaborative way. And that kind of set the bar. It wasn't very often met, you know. That's what I didn't know, is that I stepped into something really valuable and something that just had a grace to it. And everyone involved brought something of immense value. And Clive has the generosity and the compassion and the brilliance and the creative confidence to glean from everybody what he needed and to take everyone's best and to put that in. He was very selfless that way. All of the visuals, the lights coming through, this stuff, Robin Vision, and you know, the music, everyone was so talented that I got to participate in that level of art. I didn't know it was as dark until I was an adult looking at the film. And I remember being at the Egyptian. We did a question and answer after the movie, watching it like, oh, Clive! I had no idea. And I was watching these things and the sexuality and the innuendo and so many meanings on top of meanings. I had no idea. I was too busy, you know, fighting for my life and the life of my father. So...
We'll tear your soul apart.
And it isn't until the past couple of years that I really recognize the impact that it's had socially and in people's lives. It's been really important. And I think people watching it know that we're not bullshitting and know that we mean it and we're there, and you get all of these vast abilities melding together, and it's just like good alchemy.
The guy with the pins in his head, what was his deal?
I think he liked sewing and acupuncture. It was like an Eastern meets Western kind of collective to show that you could be domestic and Zen. I think my rash is coming back.
And that's the end of that. We can't go any further with that. That's it.
I think you can speak to any musician, any composer, and they'll all tell you one thing, and that is, you know, once music is in your life, you're given the opportunity to enter into a really kind of exclusive club, and once you're in, you never get out, really. Even if you stop performing or writing, it's always there inside of you, and it influences the way you perceive the world. Everything gets filtered through this musical mind that you have. it was just by fluke. I walked into a record store in Red Bank, New Jersey, called Jack's. That was the place I used to go to. That was Sanctuary. It was like my church, you know. And I went in there one day, and lo and behold, sitting in the tiny little section off of the weak corner of the dark corner of the store was a soundtrack section, and there was this record called The Fantasy Film World of Bernard Herrmann, and a really cool cover on it. I said, what's this all about? And then I read that these were, you know, scores written for science fiction films. And I said, my God, right. Movies have music, don't they? Right. But I was totally into science fiction at the time. I thought, hey, I'd be anxious to see what Bernard Herrmann here does to depict a journey to the center of the earth in music. And I remember going back home and dropping the needle on the record and hearing, you know, if you know that record, or see, it's now available on CD, it opens up with the sunrise music as James Mason and the crew are approaching the big volcano. And I went, what is this? And then it goes into the main title, and of course, and the journey out of the volcano, and I was immediately, I said, this guy is doing what I've been wanting. I've been sort of struggling to find in my own attempts at writing. I got an amazing gig with Hellraiser. Tony Randall, who directed Hellbound, was then head of one of the heads of post-production at New World Pictures. And Tony, I am so eternally grateful to him for his belief in my talents at a very early age, way long ago. I just finished The Power, I think, the sequel to, or the follow-up to The Dawn That Dripped Blood. And Jeff Ober had a screening at the Avco Theater in Westwood. And who came but Tony and Clark Henderson, who used to be Roger Corman's right-hand man. And they both took a great interest in what I'd done. They liked what they heard, and I think more importantly, or equally as important, they liked the fact that I did it with very little money. And I got an orchestra. Then that opened the door for films like Avenging Angel and Torment and The Telephone. Anyway, so lo and behold, it comes time where Tony, he's the only person who really representing New World Pictures, who goes to England while they're shooting the movie, Hellraiser. And he knows Clive and says, so Clive, what do you do for music? I think Clive was thinking of using a group called Coil, who were friends of his from England, whose music is extremely inventive. I mean, at the time, it was like really novel, very ambient, very musique concrète-like, you know, the manipulation of natural sounds that are being twisted and turned. And, you know, he has a conversation with Coil and says, hey guys, do you know how to hit catches, you know, catch cuts and be able to address specific moments of the picture? And they said, nah, we don't really do that. And so I think he encouraged Clive to look into hiring a composer who knew how to tailor their music to hit things and illustrate moments in a much more direct manner than the sort of ambient stuff I think that that Coil would have done. I met with Clive in New York City, and we got along very well. He hired me based really on Tony's recommendation. He did say to me, listen, you know, yeah, you just scored Nightmare on Elm Street 2. That's all fine, but that score's not right for my movie. I said, okay, what's right for your movie? And then he was the one who illuminated to me that this was a very sick romance, first and foremost. This mystery, yes, there's horror in this film, but most importantly, this is a very, very, very sick, but very sincere love story about a woman who falls in love with her husband's brother, and it's a very abusive relationship,
And we've all had those experiences. But nonetheless, even though we know it's unhealthy, we can't leave it because we're addicted. And in her case, her addiction is about as severe as you can get. She's willing to kill other men for him, seduce men to come back and then to knock them off so she can use their blood to bring them back to life. So that's what made the film interesting. It was unlike any other horror film I'd ever seen before, and unlike any other horror film I've ever done since, because at the crux of it, you see, was this twisted love. And so I couldn't do shrieking strings throughout the whole film. And I knew that if I had failed in illustrating those emotions, that the film, I would have failed in my mission. My knee-jerk reaction was, this is a very small claustrophobic film, all shot, most of it shot inside a very small house. Won't a big orchestra like swallow this thing and seem so out of place? Shouldn't it be a much more transparent and intimate score? And he was the one, I'm pretty sure, who said, no, don't worry about it. We need a big orchestra. Do me a favor. Think big. So he gave me permission to think big, and I might not have otherwise. Now, talking about things I learned from Clive, these are two things that popped right into my head. It was Clive that suggested that scene in which Frank comes back to life was scored with a waltz, and to make it almost beautiful. It's a sick-looking scene, but he wanted the music to make it appealing, you know, and balletic, you know, which indeed it is. It's a waltz. It's a dance. You can dance to this thing. I probably wouldn't have done it that way. I might have looked at the scene and gone, oh, this is really horrific. I better make this kind of ugly music. You know, it was he who strongly suggested I go with a waltz. And lo and behold, couldn't have gotten a better suggestion. I wish I could have said that was my own brain that came up with that concept. The other thing, and the most important thing I learned from Clive, which then became a reoccurring idea that I experienced with every other horror director I work with, and that is the concept of simplicity. And even though in horror films, visually and cerebrally, the ideas that are being presented can be extraordinarily complex, the music should be simple whenever possible. You know, after having read Clive's books, his books of blood, I thought, wow, this is a guy who's going to love it when I start doing this kind of stuff and making a lot of sonic vomit, you know, and just massive blocks of incredibly dramatic insanity. Because I love doing that, you know. But no, he wants something really simple. So that's the you know, it's the lure of simplicity. It's, you know, it's like the barker at the carnival. Come on, come backstage now. Let me show you something. You shouldn't be looking at this, but come on now, you want it, you know. And the best way to lure an audience into doing something they should not be doing is through offering up something that's very simple, very catchy, very direct. I swear, if we were to turn the lights off in this room right now and I was to ask you to sit in silence for about 15 minutes, and then I was to take like a quarter or a nickel and toss it against the window, it's a tiny little sound. That's all it's needed, and we would be scared out of our wits. So sometimes the simplest materials can generate the most sincere and direct response, fearful, shock, horror from the audience. Sonically, that's all you need. There's the lament configuration, the box. And indeed, when Kirsty is in the hospital, when the box opens up, it has to be playing music. I remember that scene because, that's right, it goes into canon. I started off in one voice, and that was a big thing about being in stereo, which was nice. I started off in this speaker, then it's answered in that speaker, and then answered in the right speaker, and I've got all three of them going at the same time, and it creates this cacophony. I wrote that theme specifically for the lament configuration, the box, and I would have loved, and I still would love, this would be a dream, and I probably could pursue this and make it work, was to actually have a real music box built. Because this was done with synths. These are samples of glockenspiels and metal, the metal bars from actual music boxes combined with, I think, celeste and a variety of other things to try to create a music box sound. Now, when I think of that score, to me, the scene that I probably am most happy with, in terms of the way I've scored, was precisely that scene in which Julie has a flashback and she meets Frank for the first time and they make love. I remember worrying about how am I going to score this. If I don't make this one work, we're in trouble. Because I needed to convince the audience that at that moment that her passion for this man was so thorough that she would be willing to do what she does do, again, to kill in his behalf. So we recorded that cue, and remember, again, this was a low-budget movie, and I recorded that in a studio in Hollywood that had no projection. So we didn't get to see it to the movie when I recorded it. We would record these things to click, and then I describe, you know, this is when this is happening, this is when this is happening. And they'd have to imagine it. It's a building, it's a kind of quasi-Passacaglia. It's got this ground base that keeps moving. Then I keep adding these lines. I start with the melody, and another one on top of the melody repeats, another line, and it just gets more and more intense until she has the orgasm, you know. I remember when we cut it, we finally went down to an editing room at New World Pictures. We put that cue up to the scene, and we all saw it for the first time. And I was exhausted. And I remember Tony and I crying. We hugged each other and cried, because it just seemed like it caught the scene. There is no greater a challenge, I would say, for someone who truly cares about their music than to be asked to do a sequel to their own work. Because in many ways, there's no better way to test, has this composer grown? Is he getting better or getting worse? Now, it'd be one thing if every sequel score by other film composers turned out to be less than their predecessor, but we have some great examples in the science fiction and horror worlds of triplet scores that each one gets better. I mean, Goldsmith Omen series, what a series of tremendous scores. You know, John Williams and the Star Wars and the Indiana Jones series, they all get a little bit better, you know. So, yes, I was scared shitless, as they say, you know, that I was not going to be able to outdo myself. And the one thing they had more money, you see, and that was appealing, and for the music, you know, not for me, but for the music, because I thought, okay, if I'm going to do this, I better top myself. It's a challenge, you know. And so I definitely, through Tony Randall, was given permission to make it bigger. Right from the main title, you know, he wanted to say, this is the new improved. If you recall on Hellbound, the film opens up with a montage of clips from Hellraiser. And that's music from the Hellraiser, and all the footage is from Hellraiser, and it's mixed in mono, and it's sort of, I think as I recall, it's kind of grungy looking, it's grungy sounding for sure. And then it's my main title in the first credit of I guess New World Pictures that goes stereo. So it was entirely up to the music to give this new improved thing. And so it's very wide sound, and it starts off with a big bash. You know, Piatti and the orchestra just being behemoth, 8 French horns, with a choir screaming at the top of their lungs, and it's written at like double forte, and it just bites you. And he said to me he wanted that He wanted the score, at least the main title, to be a celebration of horror. Hallelujah, hallelujah. You know, blood and guts, blood and guts. What do I love about horror films? At their best moments, I think that they tap into something that is so important. Important in what way, you might ask? Wasn't it H.P. Lovecraft that said, you know, the oldest emotion known to mankind is fear, and the greatest fear of them all is that of the unknown. I've always adored that, because I do feel that horror films, that induce a sense of fear, depending on how it's being induced, can be a very positive experience. And as a composer, there's nothing more rewarding to try to capture that. I'm so thankful, A, that I met Tony Randall, B, that Tony Randall was a friend, liked me and felt strongly enough about my music that he would recommend me to Clive, that Clive actually hired me. Hellraiser was unquestionably the most important film I had done up to that moment. And in very many ways, still to this day, you know, oh, you're the guy that did the score to Hellraiser. I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to have worked with Clive on this movie. Because let's face it, we know this guy's got an amazing mind. And that for some reason he thought that I could complement his way of seeing the world was an honor. Because I adored horror when I was a kid. I mean, my heroes were monsters. So I understood his world. That is a blessing, you know. And that the film still has held up after all these years. And many fans or whatever will still point it as being my best. That was your best score, you know. I'm going, oh, no, really? But I was like, how many, 20 years ago? Really? That's your best.
Clive and I were at high school together in Liverpool, and I first met him in rehearsals for the school play. He was also writing and directing and starring in his own plays at school, which was where I first hooked up with him. Then we were working in the theatre together with the Dog Company, doing original plays by Clive, and I think it was 1985 that he first mentioned Hellraiser to me. I had already read the manuscript of The Hellbound Heart, so I knew what he was talking about. So that was it. Was just a year before we started filming Hellraiser, which was, I think, around about September '86. In a lot of ways, Hellraiser is of its time and not of its time. It has elements of the slasher movie about it, but it is not that. It's principally not that, I think, because of the Cenobites, which brings in a whole other level to the film. In a lot of ways, Hellraiser is a gothic horror film.
We want the man who did this.
Clive has also said that Hellraiser was Ibsen with monsters. That it's this family tragedy, family drama.
We can all be happy here.
With these things up in the attic, the bats in the belfry.
No!
I approached Hellraiser very much thinking, well, great, I'm going to play a monster in a horror film. I've always been a fan of horror movies, so to get a chance to do that was great. As the movie went on, I felt increasingly that really Pinhead is not the monster. The monsters are Julia and Frank.
It's nothing personal, babe.
And Pinhead, in a lot of ways, I felt, is like an impartial judge. He doesn't have an opinion whether what people are doing is good or bad. He just sits there like the demonic umpire at Wimbledon and keeps score.
Oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
In the first movie, from talking to Clive, I knew that he had been human. But I didn't know who, and I didn't know when. So I didn't know whether it was last week or last month or 20 years ago or 1,000 years ago. But I knew that that was there, and I did use it because I sensed very much when I first got to look at myself in the mirror with the pinhead makeup on, amongst a lot of feelings and emotions that swept over me in about 30 seconds when I first saw that, was a tremendous sense of melancholy, which Clive punched up because in the first day of filming, he kept giving me one note, which was do less. Just take it down, do less, take it down, do less. Which is difficult as an actor, you know. We like to feel that we're out there acting for our bread. But what I was learning and what Clive was taking me to was making friends with the makeup and knowing that if my face is dead, the makeup is doing it for me. And that punched up that sense of melancholy, which I, if you pardon the expression, I pinned onto this idea that he had an awareness of having once been human, which I linked to his interest and fascination in humans, but that he wouldn't be able to remember who or anything about him, but that he had a sense of mourning, perpetual mourning for his own lost humanity.
We have such sights to show you.
Makeup early on was a 5 or 6 hour job, really, because everybody was feeling their way with it. Jeff Portas, who designed and applied the makeup on Hellraiser and on Hellbound, it speeded up. So by Hellbound, it was coming in at the standard 4 hours. But early on, it was a long trip, and I use the word advisedly because by the end of it, I was definitely in a kind of emotionally dislocated place, which was perfect for playing the character because that's exactly where he is. But it was a very strange and quasi-mystical experience to go through. And as I say, that first time that it finished and I just looked in the mirror and there's him staring back at me.
I want to hear him confess himself.
When you're in front of the camera, you're not aware of the makeup, or more accurately, the makeup is part of what you're doing. The makeup is the thing. The worst thing about the prosthetic makeup is when you're offset, and I'm anyway not one of those actors who stays in character the whole day. When I'm not in front of the camera, I've switched off and I want to chat about football and have a cup of coffee and a cigarette, and you know, and you desperately just want to be able to lift this head off and put it over here somewhere and put your own head back on and just reclaim yourself for 10 minutes, and you can't do it. You have to carry that makeup round all day. People don't really respond to you as you. They're responding to Pinhead the whole day.
Taste our pleasures.
You get into very strange places.
Oh, yes.
And you can't settle. I become a nomad. I want to be on my own, but after I've been on my own for 10 minutes, I can't cope with being on my own with this stuff, and you go out and seek other people to chat to, and after 10 minutes of that, you feel uncomfortable with that, and you go off and wander around. It takes about an hour to take it off. Joe always disliked more than the putting on, which may just have been a psychological thing, that it's over. Get me out of, I'm a human being, get me out of here. But it was a lot of poking and prodding with brushes and oil, and I didn't like it. Well, Hellraiser was my first movie. So my first day on Hellraiser was quite extraordinary. Talk about a steep learning curve. I'm getting used to this strange chain of command that goes on a movie set, and the way that works. Up to that point, I'd done 10 years of theatre, which is a very different discipline. So I was learning all that stuff, but as well, I'm dealing with the makeup and contact lenses and wearing a skirt and not tripping over, and the lenses were not to my prescription and were very dark and I couldn't see much. And I do remember the first shot was a complete nightmare because I couldn't see my marks on the floor, and beginning mark or end mark, and I couldn't see the camera. I couldn't see my eye line. It was. It didn't feel great that first day, but I got it pretty fast, I think. Atmospheres, I think, is what I remember as much as anything else, particularly when we got to do the full-on torture room stuff and the chains were going. And people ask me, do you get scared when you're making these films? Well, no, you don't ever really get scared, but there are moments when the atmospheres get to you. And certainly in the torture room scenes in Hellraiser, that was going full tilt.
Jesus wept.
The Cenobites collectively have never been as good as they were in Hellraiser and Hellbound.
Not leaving us so soon, are you?
A lot of that is marks to Clive again, because obviously it would have been very easy to just put any old extra or stunt guy or whatever in the Cenobite makeups and costume, and then get voiceover people in subsequently to do the voices where needed, which for Butterball and Chatterer weren't required anyway because they don't speak. But it was Clive's call that he wanted actors in the makeup because he wanted these characters to be inhabited and have their own life. So even in the case of Butterball and Chatterer, who could very easily be considered just Atmos, Simon Bamford and Nick Vince, both professional actors and both in there and both really inhabiting that world, and it shows on screen.
We can't. Not alone. You solved the box. We came. Now you must come with us.
There was stuff that we filmed for Hellraiser, and I don't know whether it exists, but it was certainly filmed. Clive had, I don't think it's even in the screenplay, put us in like little monkish cells with the walls covered in taboo, fetishist, quasi-religious, iconic things, pacing backwards and forwards in our cells, the idea being that this is where Cenobites are in their closed little obsessive place until they're required to come out and do their thing. But it was never in the film, and I've never seen the footage. I knew when we were doing Hellraiser that we were doing something interesting. I knew we were doing something different. And I knew with Clive at the helm it was going to look good, and the dark side of it would be absolutely to the fore. I didn't think it would take off the way that it did, and least of all with my own character, who was not, in my mind, or indeed in Clive's mind, the focal point of the film at all. In retrospect, I can't imagine why we didn't think that horror fans would sit in the cinema and look at Pinhead and the other Cenobites up there on the screen 20 foot high and go, whoa, those guys we like, and those guys we'd like more of, thank you. That seems obvious, but not at the time it didn't.
We'll tear your soul apart.
What's your pleasure, sir?
So until tomorrow, remember that shopping at home with your phone from the Shop at Home Club makes us happy. We love you, and always smile when you dial. Goodbye.
There, Percy. I know you're sad because the Shop at Home Club is off the air for tonight. But Mommy's got a little surprise for you. Something new. Watch and wear video from New World. That's right, baby. At the end of this movie, there will be some great souvenir offers for us. Caps, t-shirts, satin jackets. Oh, I can hardly wait. What's the movie? It's supposed to be scary, but we've seen scary movies before. Remember the Wicked Witch? This should be a piece of cake.
Beware. Watch and Where is next.
There, Percy. Wasn't that fun? Now for the Watch and Wear offer. Oh dear, you need a tissue. Here we go. Percy, have you ever seen such a mess? And the smell in here could raise the dead.
Watch and Where from Hellraiser.
Here comes the Watch and Wear offer. Come on, Percy, over this way. Let's get to the phone.
Stay chained to the screen, 'cause here's what we have for you. Get hooked on a Hellraiser t-shirt. We want you to hang in there. A Hellraiser thermos or mug. They're great for pouring something tasty down your tonsils. Hellraiser sweatpants and sweatshirts. Perfect attire, even if you're up against the wall. A baseball cap might be just the thing to keep your brain covered. A Hellraiser windbreaker to help keep the chill off your bones. The Hellraiser sports bag, the ideal bag for your favorite things. Satin against your skin. You know you love this satin Hellraiser jacket. And something guaranteed to liven up any dead space on your wall. The Hellraiser poster.